You saw the sunrise. Laughter. You tried to get away from the fogs that are stifling us all, away from books and houses to the truth. You were looking for a real home." "I fail to see the connection," said Leonard, hot with stupid anger. "So do I." There was a pause. "You were that last Sunday. You are this to day. Mr. Bast, I and my sister have talked you over. We wanted to help you. We also supposed you might help us. We did not have you here out of charity, which bores us, but because we hoped there would be a connection between last Sunday and other days. What is the good of your stars and trees, your sunrise and the wind, if they do not enter into our daily lives? They have never entered into mine, but into yours, we thought. Haven't we all to struggle against life's scaly greyness, against pettiness, against mechanical cheerfulness, against suspicion? I struggle by remembering my friends. Others I have known by remembering some place, some beloved place or tree. We thought you one of these." "Of course, if there's been any misunderstanding," mumbled Leonard, "all I can do is go. But I beg to state—" He paused. Ahab and Jezebel danced at his boots and made him look ridiculous. "You were picking my brain for official information. I can prove it. I—" He blew his nose and left them. "Can I help you now?" said Mr. Wilcox, turning to Margaret. "May I have one quiet word with him in the hall? Helen, go after him. Do anything, anything, to make the noodle understand." Helen hesitated. "But really," said their visitor, "ought she to?" At once she went. He resumed. "I would have chimed in, but I felt that you could polish him off for yourselves. I didn't interfere. You were splendid, Miss Schlegel, absolutely splendid. You can take my word for it. But there are very few women who could have managed him." "Oh, yes," said Margaret distractedly. "Bowling him over with those long sentences was what fetched me," cried Evie. "Yes, indeed," chuckled her father. "All that part about mechanical cheerfulness. Oh, fine!" "I'm very sorry," said Margaret, collecting herself. "He's a nice creature, really. I cannot think what set him off. It has been most unpleasant for you." "Oh, I didn't mind." Then he changed his mood. He asked as if he might speak as an old friend, and, permission given, said, "Oughtn't you really to be more careful?" Margaret laughed, though her thoughts still strayed after Helen. "Do you realise that it's all your fault?" she said. "You're responsible." "I?" "This is the young man whom we were to warn against the Porphyrion. We warn him, and look!" Mr. Wilcox was annoyed. "I hardly consider that a fair deduction," he said. "Obviously unfair," said Margaret. "I was only thinking how tangled things are. It's our fault mostly, neither yours nor his." "Not his?" "No." "Miss Schlegel, you are too kind." "Yes, indeed," nodded Evie, a little contemptuously. "You behave much too well to people, and then they impose on you. I know the world and that type of man, and as soon as I entered the room I saw you had not been treating him properly. You must keep that type at a distance, otherwise they forget themselves. Sad, but true. They aren't our sort, and one must face the fact." "Yes?" "Do admit that we should never have had the outburst if he was a gentleman." "I admit it willingly," said Margaret, who was pacing up and down the room. "A gentleman would have kept his suspicions to himself." Mr. Wilcox watched her with a vague uneasiness. "What did he suspect you of?" "Of wanting to make money out of him." "Intolerable brute! But how were you to benefit?" "Exactly how indeed? Just horrible corroding suspicion. One touch of thought or of goodwill would have brushed it away. Just the senseless fear that does make men intolerable brutes." "I come back to my original point. You ought to be more careful, Miss Schlegel. Your servants ought to have orders not to let such people in." She turned to him frankly. "Let me explain exactly why we like this man and want to see him again." "That's your clever way of talking. I shall never believe you like him." "I do. Firstly, because he cares for physical adventure, just as you do. Yes, you go motoring and shooting. He would like to go camping out. Secondly, he cares for something special in adventure. It is quickest to call that special something poetry." "Oh, he's one of that writer sort." "No, oh no. I mean he may be, but it would be loathsome stuff. His brain is filled with the husks of books. Culture horrible. We want him to wash out his brain and go to the real thing. We want to show him how he may get upsides with life. As I said, either friends or the country, some—" she hesitated. "Either some very dear person or some very dear place seems necessary, to relieve life's daily grey, and to show that it is grey. If possible, one should have both." Some of her words ran past Mr. Wilcox. he let them run past; others he caught and criticised with admirable lucidity. Your mistake is this, and it is a very common mistake. This young bounder has a life of his own. What right have you to conclude that it is an unsuccessful life, or, as you call it, grey? Because 1 minute. You know nothing about him. He probably has his own joys and interests, wife, children, snug little home. That's where we practical fellows," he smiled, "are more tolerant than you intellectuals. We live and let live, and assume that things are jogging on fairly well elsewhere, and that the ordinary plain man may be trusted to look after his own affairs. I quite grant. I look at the faces of the clerks in my office and observe them to be dull, but I don't know what's going on beneath. So, by the way, with London. I have heard you rail against London, Miss Schlegel, and it seems a funny thing to say, but I was very angry with you. What do you know about London? You only see civilization from the outside. I don't say in your case, but in too many cases that attitude leads to morbidity, discontent, and socialism." She admitted the strength of his position, though it undermined imagination. As he spoke, some outposts of poetry, and perhaps of sympathy, fell ruining, and she retreated to what she called her "second line," to the special facts of the case. "His wife is an old bore," she said simply. "He never went home last Saturday night because he wanted to be alone, and she thought he was with us." "With you?" "Yes," Evie tittered. "He hasn't got the cosy home that you assumed. He needs outside interests." "Naughty young man!" cried the girl. "Naughty?" said Margaret, who hated naughtiness more than sin. "When you're married, Miss Wilcox, won't you want outside interests?" "He has apparently got them," put in Mr. Wilcox slyly. "Yes, indeed, father." "He was tramping in Surrey, if you mean that," said Margaret, pacing away rather crossly. "Oh, I dare say." "Miss Wilcox, he was." From Mr. Wilcox, who thought the episode amusing, if risque. With most ladies he would not have discussed it, but he was trading on Margaret's reputation as an emancipated woman. He said so, and about such a thing he wouldn't lie. They both began to laugh. "That's where I differ from you. Men lie about their positions and prospects, but not about a thing of that sort." He shook his head. "Miss Schlegel, excuse me, but I know the type." "I said before, he isn't a type. He cares about adventures rightly. He's certain that our smug existence isn't all. He's vulgar and hysterical and bookish. But don't think that sums him up. There's manhood in him as well. Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. He's a real man." As she spoke their eyes met, and it was as if Mr. Wilcox's defences fell. She saw back to the real man in him. Unwittingly she had touched his emotions. A woman and two men, they had formed the magic triangle of sex, and the male was thrilled to jealousy in case the female was attracted by another male. Love, say the ascetics, reveals our shameful kinship with the beasts. Be it so, one can bear that. Jealousy is the real shame. It is jealousy, not love, that connects us with the farmyard intolerably, and calls up visions of two angry cocks and a complacent hen. Margaret crushed complacency down because she was civilized. Mr. Wilcox, uncivilized, continued to feel anger long after he had rebuilt his defences, and was again presenting a bastion to the world. "Miss Schlegel, you're a pair of dear creatures, but you really must be careful in this uncharitable world. What does your brother say?" "I forget." "Surely he has some opinion. He laughs, if I remember correctly." "He's very clever, isn't he?" said Evie, who had met and detested Tibby at Oxford. "Yes, pretty well. But I wonder what Helen's doing." "She's very young to undertake this sort of thing," said Mr. Wilcox. Margaret went out into the landing. She heard no sound, and Mr. Bast's topper was missing from the hall. "Helen!" she called. "Yes," replied a voice from the library. "You in there?" "Yes, he's gone some time." Margaret went to her. "Why, you're all alone," she said. "Yes, it's all right, Meg. Poor, poor creature. Come back to the Wilcoxes and tell me later. Mr. W. much concerned and slightly titillated." "Oh, I've no patience with him. I hate him. Poor dear Mr. Bast. He wanted to talk literature, and we would talk business. Such a muddle of a man, and yet so worth pulling through. I like him extraordinarily." "Well done," said Margaret, kissing her. "But come into the drawing room now, and don't talk about him to the Wilcoxes. Make light of the whole thing." Helen came, and behaved with a cheerfulness that reassured their visitor. This hen, at all events, was fancy free. "He's gone with my blessing," she cried. And now for puppies.